I was talking recently about this thing I do, which is rubbing bits of skin together and then thinking my way into the gap to kind of imaginatively associate with this feedback loop. And I've just been thinking about that in terms of, because what I claimed in there is that's the only sensory experience in which a sense feeds back into itself, so that, well, what I said in that thing. I've been thinking again about that. Not so much that it's not true. I think there is a truth in that. You certainly can't look into your own eye. You can't listen to the sound of your ear. You can't taste your tongue, and so on. But I do think that there are other kinds of experiences we have which emerge from us being social beings and not just individual beings. I mean, the thing that immediately springs to mind, actually, is touching another person's skin. Oh, here's Max, look, I'll just show you this dog. I think it's Italian Spinoni. Fantastic dog. But certainly touching another person's skin, or maybe particularly, I have to say, kissing somebody. A really good kiss, it seems to me, is one in which the sense of this is going to sound really cheesy, actually, but when you're really engaged in a good kiss, it seems to me, you don't feel yourself just on this side of your own lips, if you know what I mean. You kind of feel yourself at least partially located on the other side of the lips, at the very least, and in the mind of the person being kissed, of the other person who's engaged in that activity with you, or perhaps even kind of dissolved into the act itself, into that space, or the illusion of that space, where one set of sensory nerve endings meets another set of sensory nerve endings. So I think there is something interestingly created at that point, which you kind of inhabit. I'm guessing it's probably something to do with mirror neurons, although I don't really know for a fact. It's probably the case that you're intuiting the other person's act of kissing. You're intuiting what they're doing, and that's creating a kind of internal feedback loop. So you're experiencing their experiencing of your experience, and so it goes on. Maybe. It's reminded me of two things which follow from that, one of which is nice and one of which is not so nice. The not so nice one, I think, is this film by Catherine Bigelow called Strange Days, which I think is a really disturbing film. I find it really disturbing. It's a science fiction film set in the near future, and the major conceit in this film is a piece of technology which is like this net thing that fits over your head and records subjective experience, whatever that may be, all kinds of subjective experience, a multimodal multimodal recording of all your experience. So it's typically used for pornographic application. You record someone having sex, and then you can play it back, and then you can put the net on yourself and play it back and experience what they were experiencing. That seems to be the dominant model. But it's also used in this film for recording the sensory equivalent of snuff movies. So you can record someone being killed or dying in unpleasant circumstances, and then you can play back their experience, so you can feel what it's like to die as that person. Or you can also use it in addition to a kind of recording mode. You can use it as a kind of transmitter, so that you can experience along with the other person. Whilst they're experiencing something, you can be experiencing something as well. And one of the kind of punchlines of this film is that this really evil character is a kind of sadomasochist snuff movie producer, I guess, of sorts. And what he gets off on is recording his victim's experience, subjective experience. He puts this net on his victims whilst he's carrying out these acts of sadomasochistic and torture and that kind of thing with them, strangles them, I think. So he's feeling what they're feeling while he's doing to them what he's doing to them. So it's a not very virtuous circle going on there of experiencing and committing. It's both the person's tightening the noose and the person whose neck is being constricted. It's a feedback loop. The other and slightly more virtuous circle I'm thinking of is not to do with that kind of activity at all, or at least not directly. It's It's to do with ideas that you find in people like Marting Buber and to a certain extent Michael Polanyi. Marting Buber's got this really lovely book. He's a theologian, I know, but he writes really nicely. It's a really nice book called I, Thou, or I and Thou. And he says that that this thing we call an I, this self, he says there are two types of that. There's the I which exists in relation to a you. So if you're with another person, you are one person and I beg your pardon, the I is one person and the you, the other person, is another person. And the I in that relationship is one particular kind of I. And then he says there's an I and a thou. And when you're in an I-thou relationship, you fully understand that the other person is a person as you are a person. And you are, he doesn't use this language, but you're kind of empathetically enmeshed within their active being. And you're experiencing their being with you as you are being with them. And the I that you are in that relationship is a very different I than the I that's in an I-you relationship. I-thou. I'm not sure if he articulated that at all well. But in Polanyi, which I think is slightly easier to understand, at least for me at least, he talks about relations which are from, to, and from, at. So you can have a relationship, so I can have a relationship, he's talking about people, but I'll talk about it in terms of a tree. So I can have a relationship with this tree in which here I am, a subject. Is this right? Yeah. Here I am, a subject, and there's this tree as an object. And my intentionality, my engagement is projected at the tree, almost like a beam of intentionality flying out from me and hitting the surface of that tree, or from, at. I think that's right. But then he says that this other engagement you can have, which is a from, to, which demands an active recipient. So you have to kind of identify, the language is all wrong in this, I'm sorry about this. You have to kind of identify with the target of your intentionality. So when I'm looking at the tree, my intention is going from me, but instead of flying at the tree like a missile and that's being projected at it, it goes to it in the way that a letter goes from one person to a receiver, and both projector and recipient are equally valuable in that communication. So there's a kind of from to relationship, which I think again is a little bit like this for me. You know, you have to get yourself involved in the relationship, and you have to feel yourself produced by the relationship, emergent from the relationship. And for me, whether that's as simple as this little feeling of skin rubbing against skin, and it's the rubbing sensation in the centre which is kind of who I am at that moment, or whether it be the I that's produced in Buber's I Thou, or whether it be the channel that opens up in a from to relationship in Polanyi, or when you have a really good kiss. You know, you kind of dissolve into the experience, I suppose. Last thing on this thing actually, which I'll stick, there'll be a bad edit there because I'm going to stick this in the end of the last video. In addition to Buber, in addition to Polanyi, you know, the I, thou, and the from, at, and this kind of skin to skin thing, I do think that something funny happens when you look into someone else's eyes actually. It's not the same as looking at another object, and it's not the same as just looking at a person. Those things are different. But I think looking into someone else's eyes, close up ideally, is a relatively unique experience, which for me at least is a bit like this. I think even if you strip it of all its other contexts, you know, to do with the fact that you're probably looking into the eyes of someone you're very close to intimately, but even stripped of that, stripped of any kind of sexual overtones, stripped of any kind of potential threatening overtones, any of those kind of stuff stripped away, I still think something relatively unique happens at that point. You know, if you tend very closely to your sensation at that point, I do think there is a sense in which, you know, the fact that you're looking at someone, looking at you, looking at them, looking at you, looking at them, that little feedback loop does produce this kind of weird holographic thou, I, thou strangeness in the middle. I think the you that you are when you're looking at someone else in the eyes is not the same you as you that's looking at the surface of their skin or looking at an object or with your eyes shut.